As we listen to the story from Genesis today, there are two questions that kind of struck me. Why did God ask Abraham to offer up his son Isaac? What was God really thinking about when he did that? And secondly, and I think any parent would understand this question, why did Abraham comply? I mean, think about it as a parent. Would you really be willing to offer up your child to God in that way? And so, as we think about these questions, one of the things we might be able to recognize is we might not easily answer the first question, what was God really thinking? But I think the answer comes out of the second. And that, I think we can answer. Why was Abraham willing to do this? And it's really simple. Abraham trusted that God would provide the sacrifice. We don't hear that today in the reading. But when Isaac and Abraham are having a discussion about what's about going on, as Isaac is carrying the wood for the offering, he recognizes that Abraham is not carrying anything. Where's the sacrifice? And as we're listening to the story, we realize the sacrifice is the one who's asking the question. But Abraham's answer to that is so telling. Because he responds to Isaac, God will provide the sacrifice. And it is that trust that is at the heart of this entire narrative. And it is that God trusted Abraham to also understand what would happen. It was trust on both sides. God asked something incredible, something so difficult. And yet Abraham trusted that the Lord knew what he was doing and that it would work out for the best. And as we enter into Lent, it really is to that same sense of trust that each and every one of us are called. Lent is a time to really examine our lives and to truly ask ourselves, are we willing to trust God in the same way that Abraham did? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're going to say, maybe. I'm not so sure we can give that definitive answer. But this is a time to discover how to make that happen, how to grow in relationship with God. And in opening up into that relationship, to recognize that in all the different ways that our God is calling us to sacrifice, whether in small ways or large ways, that the truth and the reality is the real sacrifice that is needed will never come from us. We can never truly give to God that sacrifice that fixes everything. We can never provide God that sacrifice which will make all things whole again. It's impossible. We're sinners. We're broken. Whatever sacrifice we give to the Lord will in its own way be broken in some way. And this is where we come to trust as Abraham did. We cannot provide the sacrifice. We are called to sacrifice, but we have to recognize what our sacrifice actually leads us to. Because ultimately, as Abraham said, God will provide the sacrifice, and he did just that for us in Jesus. Jesus became and is our sacrifice. And whatever sacrifice we make is really ultimately intended to be tied into the sacrifice of Christ, because it is Christ and Christ alone who can both offer and be the perfect sacrifice. And Christ alone has the capacity to do that. He is the perfect sacrifice to the Father. And ultimately, we are called to open our hearts and our lives to Jesus, to grow in that relationship with Christ that will allow us to truly unite ourselves with him in all things. And as I said, we're broken. We are sinners. And sometimes I think the lack of trust that we have in God is not so much about God as it is about us. As we recognize that brokenness and sinfulness, we wonder, how can we unite ourselves with Christ? How can we unite ourselves with that perfect sacrifice that is the cross? And Paul tells us today, if God is for us, who can be against us? And that's the answer. Our God is not looking for us to be perfect. He doesn't accept us in spite of our sinfulness. He accepts us simply for who we are and where we're at in our lives, to bring us along the journey of faith that will bring us ultimately to salvation. It will never be about perfection. It will simply be about trusting our God to be with us always, and to recognize that our God will always accept, in our brokenness and our sinfulness, whatever it is that we can offer to him. Because all we have to do is unite ourselves with Christ. And know again those words of Paul. And know that he is speaking these words to you today. If God is for us, who can be against us?